Witam wszystkich. To jest ostatnia debata z serii Kryzys zaufania w Europie. My organizujemy te debaty jako Kultura Liberalna z siecią Time to Talk. Wspiera cały projekt Open Society Foundation. Dzisiejsza debata jest debatą, która poniekąd puentuje te wcześniejsze rozważania, bo będziemy rozmawiać o kryzysie zaufania społeczeństwa do państwa. Adrian Wooldridge, dziennikarz The Economist, współautor książki Czwarta rewolucja, którą tutaj można zobaczyć, która niebawem się ma ukazać w języku polskim. Profesor Ewa Łętowska, pani profesor Anna Giza, socjolożka, prorektor do spraw rozwoju i polityki finansowej Uniwersytetu Warszawskiego. Profesor Joanna Tyrowicz, ekonomistka, która jest starszą ekonomistką w Instytucie Ekonomicznym NBP. Poprzednie pokolenia zadawały sobie pytanie w ogóle po co państwo, tak? Zadawały sobie pytania w 1989, do czego im potrzebne jest to państwo. W 25 roku III Rzeczypospolitej dyskusja, jak widać, uległa zmianie. Rozmawiamy już w innej tonacji. Jak widać, pojawiły się inne problemy.
Yes, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me here. This is my first ever visit to Poland, so thank you. This book was really a counterblast against three sorts of people. The one is conservatives, right-wingers, who say that the state doesn't matter, that the only thing to do with the state is, as one American conservative said, shrink it to such a size that it can be easily drowned in a bathtub. Secondly, it was a counterblast to liberals and socialists who think that the state is something that needs simply to be protected against people who want to dismantle it. The third group of people that the book was designed to deal with are ordinary people, ordinary voters, who I think have a sort of mood of discordant apathy about the state. They don't like the state, they go out to vote against governments, so there's a mood of hostility towards public political elites, but I don't think that that mood ever goes along with a really constructive sense that the state might change dramatically. People want to kick the state, but they don't really want to revolutionize it.
Our conclusion in this book basically is the state matters, the state needs to be reformed, but it's making a very bad job of it at the moment, and that for most of the post-war era we've had a sense of the world's democracies winning the race for creating a good state. And since the year 2000, we've seen democracy really slowing down. Russia has reversed away from what the democratic experiment as it was. Democracy has been a disaster in the Middle East. The European Union is not something which people find very inspiring. It's quite often very undemocratic in the way it operates. American democracy has become, I think, very flabby, very self-indulgent. The United States constantly fails to pass a budget. At the same time, the authoritarian model that the Chinese have developed has been going from success to success. It's been going from economic success in that they've had about 7 to 10% growth. So they have the circulation of elites, which democracy is supposed to provide, without disorder, without the sort of breakdown that you saw in Russia in the late 1990s. So the comparative advantage of democracy, the comparative advantage of liberal regimes has declined in the 21st century. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that democracy in the West has become too flabby.
Pani profesor, no pani reprezentuje uniwersytet także jako władza tego uniwersytetu. Reprezentuje pani uniwersytet no wciąż uważany za jeden z dwóch najlepszych w Polsce, ale jest to uniwersytet publiczny, a my wiemy skądinąd, że najlepsze uczelnie na świecie, takie jak choćby uczelnie amerykańskie, to są uczelnie prywatne. A czy w związku z tym edukacja wyższa powinna pozostać publiczna w Polsce? Jeżeli tak, to czego my od państwa możemy oczekiwać i ewentualnie jak zmieniać te uniwersytety, żebyśmy w tych szanghajskich rankingach byli trochę wyżej, a nie w 3. czy 4. setce?
When we think about our history, it's absolutely obvious that education for the time being will stay public issue in Poland. If only for the very reason that in the constitution we claim that education is open, public and free for citizens. Education as such is a kind of the most important public good that is to be delivered in a way that serves best our common goals and our common values. So we try to change the law and we try many reforms, but nobody answered the question, what are we trying to achieve? Do we really wish to have 43%, if I remember properly, people with higher education, and what for? And what higher education means? Whether higher education means just, a kind of the civilization competencies and skills that make us belonging to the civilized world, or is it about really having professional specialist knowledge, or what?
But what would be your answer to this question?
I think that we need higher education to increase the ability to identify and to develop talents that are in our society. It's not about only learning the state of science in the world, which of course is very important, but this is about autonomous thinking. We can't expect that industry and business and private money will be given for playfully, using your mind. It was believed that it's very difficult to produce high quality public goods for private money. That market cannot produce these kind of things. And of course, public money are also quite risky. Public institutions are not very innovative by their nature. So basically, I think that a kind of the mixed formula would be best.
Pan zaprezentował wizję demokracji w głębokim kryzysie. To jest oczywiste. Tu mamy prezentację, co zrobić ze sektorem szkół wyższych. A ja proponuję zejść jeszcze niżej. Dlatego, że problem kryzysu w Polsce, który jest odbiciem tego, co jest na Zachodzie, ma swoje własne cechy. A ja jestem prawnik, czyli ja jestem technik. W związku z tym ja formułuję sądy pragmatyczne. Bo to nie jest prawda, to co mówi się w dyskusjach liberalnych, jakoby prawo zawsze pożerało wolność. Prawo czasami jest sługą wolności, ponieważ jej dodaje. Ale trzeba wiedzieć, do którego narzędzia prawnego sięgnąć. Nam się wydaje, że prawo robi parlament. Nam się wydaje, że prawo robi, jeżeli jest delegowany, minister. Nieprawda, proszę Państwa. Robi oligarchia biurokratyczna. Dawniej było tak, że urzędnik państwowy rozstrzygał o spornych interesach ludzi, którzy przychodzili po decyzję tego urzędnika. W tej chwili wygodny urzędnik ministerialny lub w parlamencie woli wykreować organ partycypacyjny z dwóch grup interesów po to, że sam nie robi, a jednocześnie jest bardzo demokratyczny. W tej chwili generalny poziom, mainstream załatwiania spraw, na skutek zresztą trudności związanych z prawem europejskim, bo to jest bardzo trudne, opadł.
A liczba biurokratów w ostatnich latach wzrosła dramatycznie, więc mimo
oczywiście,
tego przyrostu jest
ale bo
mniej...
się potykają o własne nogi.
In Poland we have these two different narratives. On the one hand we learn that the Poles are these old homo sovieticuses who somehow are dependent on the state. On the other hand we hear that Poles are egoists and would like the state to be minimal, to be the night watchman. How do you, what comes out from your research, and do you think that this opposition is still legitimate?
For an economist, the question whether democracy is in retreat and whether it's an efficient way to satisfy the needs of the society is a discussion I think we have solved about 100 years ago. So basically what we prefer is called central planning as opposed to decentralized equilibrium. And any model we do and develop as economists, we show that decentralized equilibrium doesn't make use of all the possible externalities that are there. Most of economics relies on market mechanics, not because this is what economists like per se, but because we know well in models and in empirics how to address the problem of externalities. I'm not a sociologist, I'm a very simple economist, so I don't know what is homo sovieticus. I don't know also what is a liberal egoist or whatever other name you used. We also, of course, know what is homo economicus, but we're not stupid enough to think people are homo economicus. So that, I think, is solved. If we take the British example, you can complain a lot about how much failing that state is, but that state invests a lot of effort to knowing itself how it's failing. It's not always taking that into account in formulating new policy, because we know politics matter and so on. But in terms of self-evaluation, it's a standard operating procedure to do that. It's a standard operating procedure not to do that in Poland. It's rather exceptions than the rule that anybody looks at the effects of the policy they did.
You give a lot of not only incentives but also some suggestions what should be done in the administration. If you could add something, because I think that the problem is pretty universal.
The notion of the state that became embodied in practice from about the year 1900 onwards was that the state should provide people with a minimum of education, of healthcare, of welfare. The welfare state became the sort of working model. The state managed to engineer consistent economic growth and provide a whole series of valuable goods to people. But something went wrong in about the 1970s throughout much of the West, whereby the state begins to produce less and less for more and more investment. You get economic stagnation, and you get an attempt to discipline the state, to bring it back to its original functions with Thatcher, with Reagan, with a whole series of reforming politicians. And that works for a while. But I think what we've seen recently is the state has continued to grow, it's continued to sprawl, take on too many responsibilities, and it's continued to fail. Keynesian demand management thing was supposed to be a solution to a unique recession. And what it's become is standard day-to-day operating procedure all the time. We can run the state much better. We can learn from the way that the private sector manages itself and manage the state better. In the private sector, everything is measured. You constantly measure how well you're performing. And in the public sector, we haven't been measuring things. So people will always say if they don't get the results that they want, there's not enough spending. We need to spend more money. But also by having contracting out, by having competition, you can iron out differences in performance that you see in the public sector all the time.
In the book, there is an example when the public sector was computerized and old typewriters were replaced with computers, which was supposed to boost productivity and to lower the cost of public administration. And then it turned out that the new computers were used simply as typewriters, but new models of typewriters.
We tend to overestimate the impact of new technology in the short term and underestimate the impact of new technology in the long term. And the way that new technology essentially manifested itself at first was huge computer systems put in by central planners, Homo Sovieticus, trying to plan everything, and that's not improved productivity, it's not changed things. But what we're now seeing is that everybody has a supercomputer in their pocket. Everybody has an iPad, everybody has an iPhone. We have distributed intelligence all around the world, and it's this thing, the empowerment of individuals, that is going to change the nature of the state. It's going to allow us all to measure, to know how efficient the state is.
Ten nowy, wspaniały świat, który na pewno osiągniemy dzięki postępowi technicznemu, wymaga refleksji w jednym punkcie. Mianowicie każda reforma i każda zmiana, niezależnie od tego, czy ją wymusza technologia, czy ją wymuszają przepisy, zawsze nieuchronnie jako zmiana niesie ze sobą nie tylko pozytywy, ale i negatywy. Przykład. Sprywatyzowano w Polsce komorników, tych, którzy egzekwują długi. W związku z tym sprywatyzowani komornicy postanowili podwyższyć swoją produktywność. I podwyższają ją w ten sposób, że zamiast szukać dłużnika, wysyłają tytuły egzekucyjne do wszystkich znalezionych osób o nazwisku i imieniu odpowiadającym nazwisku dłużnika. To jest bardzo produktywne ze strony komorników, bardzo dla nich wygodne i oznacza przerzucenie na Bogu ducha winnych kompletnie w sprawie niezaangażowanych i dług ludzi trud wyszarpania, podkreślam, wyszarpania na nowo swojej niezależności od sytuacji, w którą zostali uwikłani.
Po 25 latach III RP należałoby oczekiwać, że no jeżeli państwo ma coś zaproponować młodym ludziom, to pojawił się taki głos etat dla każdego. Bo właśnie państwo opublikowali ten raport NBP, z którego wyszło, że rozmowa prowadzona dotychczas o śmieciówkach tak zwanych była przynajmniej, nazwijmy to, obok problemu.
We used to think, for example, the entire Polish labor code is founded on the idea that employer is an independent unit that sets the rules of the employment contract with the employee. Now, that could have been true, say, in 1980s, but right now part of the employers, for example, are foreign-owned firms that do not have decision makers in Poland. They have decision makers in headquarters. If it's decision makers in the headquarters that decide about wage growth and employment level and benefits and everything else, the very idea of an employment contract is going to be subjected to as radical changes as the ones that we see with the, firms themselves and with the IT and everything involved. When I was a small kid, my parents, when I would make statements like this, like job contract for everybody or stuff, they would say that the depth of this statement is very similar to proletariusze wszystkich krajów, łączcie się. A part of the problem that we're having, so we have little trust, and this is because we think state fails, and we think the state fails because there is much more money and abilities to do research on whether the state does its job or not. What I deem to say is that in 19th century, where everybody trusted state, nobody did research on whether Bismarckian pension system reform was accurate or inaccurate, and whether it's long-term stable and sustainable.
When the opportunity appears to exit public institution to private institution that is more efficient, which happens in Poland in health sector, in education sector and other sectors, then in public institutions stay only people who are very weak, who are not resourceful enough to have voice, which means that there is no pressure on public institution to really change and to really become more efficient, more productive. And I think that this is the side effect of privatization or offering this escape. What young people say, they say, if my state is not efficient, I will change it. I will go elsewhere. Now we are mobile, which again means that instead of exerting pressure, they just quit, they just go away and so on. If we really want to change public institutions, we need to find people who are resourceful, willing and so on. And then we have to make it not against the institution, but together with this institution, which is very difficult.
Zdarzają się debaty, które są na tyle interesujące, że pozostaje po nich niedosyt. A zatem, proszę Państwa, z tym niedosytem zostajemy. I chciałbym podziękować naszym gościom. Adrian Łużysz, pani profesor Kowalewska i pani profesor Anna Giga. I dziękuję za pytania, za Państwa obecność.